Hello and welcome to the Farming Forum's Defra ELMs question time. My name's Clive Bailey. I'm an arable farmer from Staffordshire and also founder of the Farming Forum. Before the coronavirus lockdown placed somewhat of an obstacle in all of our ways, Defra had invited the forum down to Westminster to meet David Kennedy, their Director General for Food, Farming and Biosecurity, and ask him some questions about the new ELM scheme. A thread on the forum invited farmers to put their questions directly to David, who is responsible for overseeing potentially some of the biggest changes UK agriculture will have seen for decades. Over 60 questions were submitted. 11 of those questions have been selected and will be asked today. So I'd like to welcome David and thank him for this invitation and his willingness to engage directly with farmers with this. And perhaps, David, if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit first, and then we can get into the questions.
Hello there, Clive. David Kennedy, Director General, Food, Farming and Biosecurity. So I look after the end-to-end food system work at Defra Group, but a big part of my work is the farming reforms as we leave the Common Agricultural Policy, and a big part of that is environmental land management.
So should we just get straight into these questions? This one, the first one's really quite straightforward. What's the overall aims of the ELM scheme?
The overall aim is that we want to use the public money that we have in this space to buy public goods, and particularly to buy environmental outcomes. We've got 6 sets of environmental outcomes. So we've got air quality, water quality, biodiversity, climate change, flood mitigation, and then countryside amenity and preserving that cultural heritage and beauty. So we've got 6 outcomes. We want to work with farmers. We want to pay farmers to deliver a set of ecosystem services that will result in those outcomes. So it's a win-win for everybody. I think the other thing is we want this to be widely accessible. So there's 30,000 farmers at the moment who have agri-environment agreements in countryside stewardship, environmental stewardship. Our ambition is that we design something which all farmers will be interested in and keen to do. So 85,000 BPS recipients at the moment. I would like this to be open and attractive to all of those farmers.
Okay, great. The second question was asked by a member called Renewable John, who's asking, on behalf of the 16,500 English farmers who have been excluded from any kind of support just because they have less than 5 hectares of eligible land, will the government change this so all farmers are eligible for any schemes, no matter what size of farm?
So we want to work with all farmers and a wider range of landowners as well. We don't want to restrict this on the basis of size, for example. So we will be looking for a scheme that is as widely accessible as possible.
Right, okay. And member Fudge asked, when will a detailed list of options under ELMs be published?
So I've actually just been going through a detailed list of options with my team this morning. We are making good progress on that, and the options go well beyond actually those identified for countryside stewardship, environmental stewardship. So there will be a list of options. We hope to have it in the public domain in the autumn, and earlier in the autumn is what I've asked my team to aim for. So watch this space. I know it's really important so that people can get a look and feel of what the scheme is all about. You've got to really see the options then to achieve that, but we are working on it very actively.
We'll soon start better planning a bit more positively then perhaps.
Yes.
The same member then also asked, will there be a commitment to leave the ELM scheme open for a period of years, or will farmers have to commit to the scheme in a relatively short window?
So we want to secure environmental outcomes, not for a year or 2 years, but for many years. And the kind of things that we will be working with farmers to do actually take investments that cover more than the near term. So we will have to have a longer term outlook for this scheme.
Right, okay. Next question from a different member, Gower asked, will there be a cap on ELMs payments to prevent institutions taking the lion's share of these funds that are available?
It's an interesting question. I don't think it's one we've got a definitive answer to at the moment, but again, we want this to be widely accessible. We want the vast majority of farmers to have an ELM agreement. Now, for a given pot of money, that does say we have to have some checks and balances to make sure that is distributed appropriately. So, important question. It is something we're thinking about. And as I say, the answer I think is we want this widely accessible and many farmers benefiting from the scheme and generating environmental benefits for us.
Great, right. So user Matthew has asked, who will do the best out of ELMs? A farmer that's been intensively farmed for years and thus can revert land to environmental uses, or a farm that has been already farmed sympathetically to environment and already has such features in place?
Really good question. I think our focus will be on outcomes. And so if you've achieved an outcome, we will pay you for it. You've always got, with a new scheme, a question, well, there are some people already doing this, and do you pay them for what they're already doing? But as I say, my answer to that is we care about the outcomes. We pay for the outcomes across the range of farmers. And I think that's probably irrespective of whatever your starting point is. Show that you've delivered the outcome, you've met the standard, and you should get paid for that.
This second one's a bit of a two-part question. The first part asked by Dan Powell, which is what percentage of the budget will be spent on each tier of ELMs? And then user Sid, how will farmers that have been supplying a public good for years already get rewarded as much for those as the farmers that are just starting? Can this be a points-based system with good points for good practices and points taken away for bad practices, and awaiting then a sliding scale to the financial rewards that would give?
So we haven't worked through what the revenue allocation will be between tiers 1, 2 and 3. We have got a manifesto commitment that the total amount of money will stay the same for farming through this Parliament. And so that's around about £2.4 billion a year. I think it's probably a good starting point is that within BPS, 30% of BPS payments in England are for greening. And we're not trying to recreate greening in ELM, it's got all its shortcomings, but 30% of BPS comes to about £550 million. And let's see where we get to, but I'm sure we can find that order of magnitude of things that are worthwhile paying for in tier 1. Whether we go above that, I think, is a question. So it is something we're actively working through, and it is something I've said we want to put out some details in the early autumn. It is one of the things I want to be able to say a bit more about at that point.
And that second part, I guess you've already covered that in that previous question about farmers that have already got these features in place, the differentiation between them. Yeah. So, okay. So the next question from user name EB. Could you please explain the payment mechanism that will be used to determine the value of the environmental features listed for tier 1? The Defra literature mentions free market valuations, including tendering and auctions. Does this mean that farmers will be pitted against each other to underbid for features such as cover crops or other environmental enhancing features?
I think for tiers 1 and 2, we will publish a price that we are willing to pay in order for delivery of outcomes. Question then, what is the methodology that underpins that price? We know there are many issues with the countryside stewardship methodology, which is cost-based and income foregone. I think the answer is we will have a methodology that makes being part of ELM sufficiently attractive for the vast majority of farmers. So quite what that will be, it could be a variation on the current pricing, so it would be cost or income foregone, plus some kind of incentive payment that makes this sufficiently attractive. Auctions do have a role, but for really large-scale interventions, I would have thought. So if we are looking to pay for large-scale tree plantation, that's the kind of thing which would lend itself to an auction. But I wouldn't see the tier 1 and the tier 2 being auction-based, particularly in the near term, so in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, you mentioned that this isn't a question on the list actually from the members, but you mentioned there income foregone, and I know since this thread was open and the questions are asked, more detail has come out, so the goalposts are moving constantly on these things. The question of my own, do you think income foregone is enough to positively incentivize people to make change, or do people need positive reasons to make change? They need to be in a better position rather than just standing still all the time.
Well, it depends how you define income foregone, and we could get a bit technical here. But if you benchmarked income foregone on a farmer who's not very productive, that's quite different to income foregone calibrated to the most productive farm in the country. Yeah.
So when you're quantifying that, will that income foregone depend on the farmer? Will you, if you're a farmer that's been averaging, say, a 3 tonne per acre wheat yield, will a farmer who can prove he's been averaging a 4 tonne per acre wheat yield receive a different level of payment to 3-ton guy, for instance?
So they're the kind of things we're thinking about. And at the end of the day, as I say, I don't think the current methodology would incentivize tens of thousands of farmers who don't have agri-environment agreements at the moment to go and get one. So we need something that is got stronger incentives, and stronger incentives means more generous. So we'll have to find that right balance. But let's leave this question with the objective. The objective is that this is sufficiently attractive to bring in a lot of farmers who don't currently engage in agri-environment agreements.
Yeah, okay. So, and actually this next one ties in well with that then. It's a question asked by a user called Yellow Belly. He said, will there be any reform of the agricultural tenancy laws to ensure tenants can apply for all options on the ELMs? Currently, landlords often have the veto on application for stewardship imposed by the EU. Will this be is this a scheme for farmers or a scheme for landowners?
Again, I mean, if we highlight that principle, this has to be available to the vast majority of farmers. We've got 30% of farmers in the country are tenant farmers, and we want them to be able to access this scheme, and we will design it in a way that allows that uptake, which is our objective.
The final question is from a user called Hampton, who says, you currently have 22 ELMs pilot projects around the country, controlled by many different stakeholders, many with differing modus operandi. How are you going to bring all this information together into a workable and successful scheme within the time constraints that will benefit farmers as well as environment, and not just become a fudge of conflicting ideas?
I think it's a good question. We are progressing very quickly. So that number is the tests and trials. I think we've got about 50 tests and trials now underway. And the way to think about those, so we've broken up the end-to-end design of ELM into different component parts. So how do you come up with a farm plan? How do you design an agreement? How do you for tier 2 get farmers collaborating together? So we've broken that up, we've parceled it, and that's what the tests and trials are. They're looking at different bits of that end-to-end design that we will have in place for ELM. The next thing is that we're going to put that together for the ELM pilot, and we will kick off the ELM pilot in October 21. We will open the window for applications a few months before that, in April 21. We're working very hard towards that, to stand up all the things. And so the pilot will start to put together what we are looking at in the tests and trials. There is a coherence. You might not see it from the outside, but there is a coherence because we've got all the different pieces of the jigsaw in those tests and trials. We've got a whole set of people who know how those bits of the jigsaw fit together. And they will be taking those results from the tests and trials, and they will be feeding them into the design of the pilot, it will be that jigsaw which will be done for the pilot. Now, I just would say as well, the pilot's not the last word. The pilot is a pilot, so it's a test. We want to learn, we want to innovate, and we want to have a really good design by 2024 when we roll out ELM. Very last thing I would say, it's not all about 2024. So I know a lot of farmers are thinking, they're going to have this pilot, they're going to start taking my money away in 2021, but I can only sign up for an ELM agreement in 2024. What are they going to do with all that money, and what am I going to do for those years when I'm down on the BPS payment? So we are thinking through very hard. A lot of the answer is we will give you productivity support, we will be looking at boosting animal health, we'll be looking at boosting animal welfare, but also we will be looking at simple agri-environment schemes and a transition to that rollout so that more and more farmers over the next years can get involved in agri-environment. It won't be a big bang into ELM rollout in 2024. I hope many farmers before then will have taken the steps. And again, we will say more about this in the early autumn. I'm putting a lot of store by early autumn, but we will put out details of what does 2021 look like, and 22 and 23. What does the money look like? How are we going to spend it? And what's in it for you? I think that's a really important thing for the farmers. That's what farmers need to know, and that's what we want to share with you as soon as we can. That's
great, David. I mean, just on that, obviously, again, since some of these questions were put, we've had the coronavirus upheaval and problems. Has that impacted the timescales dramatically, or have Defra managed to be able to work their way through that and keep things on track?
So there was a question, and various people raised it. Should we push back the agricultural transition from 2021 I think the answer is no. We need to crack on with this reform. There's a lot that we want to do. We have got the preparations in place. We know that we need to go out to farmers and tell them this is what it's all about. So we put our document out in February, covering the overall set of reforms. We put out the ELM discussion document in February. And by the way, we've just opened up that discussion document again. So please, if you've not taken a look and you've not fed back, please do that. We are very much in listening mode on that. But we need to give you the next set of communications and details so that you can really, as farmers, start to prepare for that. And as I say, we will do that in the early autumn.
Thanks. Hopefully your answers will provide a bit more clarity on some of the issues raised. I mean, I personally think these are really quite exciting times, to be honest. It's kind of a long over needed kind of reform to the way things are. I think it's been holding agriculture back personally. Not all farmers will agree with me, of course. But obviously there were many more questions and we couldn't possibly get through all of them today on such a busy forum. But it'd be really great if we could keep this dialogue between the forum members and Defra open. I think they really appreciate that direct communication and ability to ask people in positions such as yourselves these questions directly. So thank you very much.
I've enjoyed it. Good questions. We're very keen to engage. I would love to come back, and I think you've summarised it well. Exciting times, but it's only exciting if we make it work, and that's what we're determined to do. So thanks a lot, Clive, and let's speak again.
Great. Thank you very much, David. Speak soon. Cheers.